Today's conversation is around how are solar leases valued at exit. And it's a fireside chat. It's a discussion. We really want to bring this to the real estate community and have an active discussion on this topic that comes up a lot. And as you can see here in the picture, let's just say a building owner signed a 20-year lease for a solar lease for $298,000 a year for 20 years. What would that be worth? Should you cap it at exit at, or should it be a DCF methodology or should it be zero? Some people I think are still of that camp, and so there's a lot of confusion around this topic, and we're fortunately have a number of very seasoned perspectives on the call here to shed a little light on the topic. So as you all trickle in and as you join, please share questions. We're going to have some time at the end for everyone, but maybe Katya, if you could click ahead, I'll introduce our panelists. So I'll kick it off. My name is Peter Light. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Lumen, about 25 years of experience in energy transactions of many varieties. And at Lumen, we're the modern solar broker. We enable large commercial real estate owners to evaluate every property across different financing types, then go get competitive offers from a network of some of the best providers, and ultimately execute with confidence. So I'm very pleased to be joined today by Brian and David. And maybe Brian, I'll turn over to you first for you to introduce yourself.
Sure. Thanks, Peter. Thanks for organizing this call. And good afternoon, everyone. Brian Rappaport. I'm the head of energy advisory and distributed energy for JLL. I've also worked in the energy space almost 25 years. And at JLL, we are really working to unlock long-term value for commercial real estate occupiers, investors through fit-for-purpose energy solutions to optimize costs, enhance operational performance, and really to help future-proof real estate assets. These solutions can reduce utility costs, improve resiliency, improve sustainability, and the outcomes, and drive sustainability outcomes through a mix of distributed energy, on-site distributed energy resources, and retail energy procurement strategies.
Super. Yeah. Well, thank you, Brian. Great. And yeah, David, over to you. Maybe you could share a bit of your background.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Peter. I'm really looking forward to this panel. I think Peter put together, Brian and I, and the content that you're going to hear today is going to be hopefully very helpful for you. But yeah, my name is Dave Thiele. I'm the head of real estate valuations at Nuveen. It's an asset management arm of TIAA. TIAA is Teachers Insurance Annuity Association of America. It's a large pension fund, life insurance company, and the participants can invest in real estate through the various 50 plus real estate funds that Nuveen manages on behalf of TIAA. And I had the real estate valuation team. We make sure that all the properties and assets owned by TIAA are valued on a quarterly basis, sometimes on a semi-annual basis, but the majority of the funds and the properties are appraised quarterly, ranging from retail properties, office properties, multifamily, industrial, and another special use type properties such as like data centers. So looking forward to having this discussion with everyone, and I'll turn it back to you, Peter.
Super. Thank you. Well, I already see some questions filtering in, so thank you for those that have already asked, and we will make sure we get to those in the discussion. So maybe Katya, if you click ahead. I first want to ground everyone on just the state of solar at a global level. In the last year, there's $450 billion invested in solar globally in 2025. You can see the growth rate here, and you can see the acceleration that's happening. I think it's something that's it's a quiet revolution in the energy industry. And I share this because sometimes I think in commercial real estate, it can seem like this is a new emerging unproven technology and maybe something for kids at the kiddie table, but not quite, for the serious, transactions of buildings. And I just want to highlight just the gross tonnage of dollars that are being deployed today already and accelerating. So if you haven't seen this, it is coming. It is coming to real estate. And if you maybe click ahead, what you can also see is some data we assembled. There was a JLL report, which we'll get to, but it highlighted that institutional commercial real estate is already adopting solar. And something that stuck out to me was that among the top 30 industrial and logistics owners, 79% had already adopted solar in some form. And that usually leads to other energy technologies like batteries and other things we'll get into. On the left, you see a number of the logos. On the right is data that we pulled from that is public but buried around applications for projects that are either operating or in development just in a couple states. So, for example, in Maryland, you have about 408 projects in development today. In New Jersey, separately, another 400. So there are many, many hundreds of these projects, mainly on larger, flat, industrial and logistic rooftops, though it could be on multifamily, it could be an office as well. But I think the majority of total megawatts and the sort of highest revenue opportunities that we tend to see are in the industrial space. So we'll have a slight skew in that direction today, just because that's where most of the data has surfaced. But I want to make sure everyone just has a sense of how real this is becoming. And yet, something that we at Lumen hear all the time is, well, that's interesting. I heard about it at a conference, or I heard about a friend doing this, but my job as a real estate asset manager is to maintain and improve the value of this property. And I want to know if I agree to this, if I agree to this infrastructure project that I either fund myself or if I have a third party lease my rooftop, how is this going to affect the sale of my property? Because that is the North Star of my operation. And so we've seen a bit of confusion around this issue, and I think fortunately we're here to have a rich discussion about it. So maybe if you could, Katya, if you could advance, David could just, well, first maybe David, before we go into all the configurations, could you just ground us in what you see, some of the basics of just how are buildings valued today, and then we'll get into the energy pieces and turn it over to Brian.
Sure. So let's just start with the basics, like with a simple industrial building. It's leased out to one or two tenants. So the way that's valued is based on the income generated off of those leases. We look at the leases, we determine the lease start date, lease end date, what the contract rent is, and are there any rental steps? Are there any concessions? That's all modeled within our valuation tool, usually a discounted cash flow analysis to value this piece of property. But really what it is what we're modeling and discounting it back. And you're probably wondering, what is a discount rate? Well, the discount rate is really just a all-encompassing rate that factors in the rent growth, the changes in from one tenant to the other tenant, at the end of the lease term, that's considered rollover. And then also considers the reversion. When you sell the property after holding it for so many years, you end up selling it. And that's usually determined by a direct cap rate. So when you discount all those cash flows back to a present value, that's the discount rate. Whereas a direct cap rate is encompassing, assuming it's implicit that there's going to be rental growth over the contract, there's going to be market rent grows each year, and then there's the reversion value that's, considered at the end of the holding period. So that all-inclusive, all-encumbering rate, the direct cap rate, basically is applying to the first year net operating income. Net operating income is your revenue minus the vacancy, credit loss or collection loss, minus operating expenses for the property, and that gives you a property net operating income in the first year. So that's really simplistically.
Oh, sorry, please go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say that that's really a simplistic method of valuing, let's say, an industrial building.
Great. And you mentioned something around, looking at the first year, because I think one of the questions is going to become, how do we align this new energy rent, if you will, with the underlying building rent. Is there a common methodology around just the start and end date of the first year? Is it just rolling 12 months or is it next calendar year? What do you see in practice?
So it's all determined on the client and what they want the effective data value to be. For institutions, some like it at the end of the quarter, every quarter. So like March 31st, June 30th, September 30th, December 31. And so those are your dates of value.
Mhm.
So that would be the start of your holding period. And so your first year, let's say it's a March 31st value. So April 1 through March 31st of the following year is your first year.
Great. Thank you. Thank you. And that's the foundation. And I think many on the phone have probably traversed this a bit before, but sometimes if you're like me, you've heard these terms, but then you haven't really thought through the basics again. So it's very helpful to get the foundation because that is the framework against which these new on-site energy transactions start to be considered. And maybe I'll turn it over to Brian to explain the 101 of the different ways to transact around solar and batteries. Maybe you could speak to behind the meter and front of the meter, and then we'll get into front of the meter valuation.
Sure. Yeah. And maybe I can just comment on one thing before getting into how these energy systems are designed and implemented. You brought up a great statistic before, Peter, that roughly 79% of the top 30 US industrial logistics owners have adopted rooftop solar. But the silver lining here is that there's a tremendous amount of untapped potential. If you look across all commercial and industrial real estate, roughly only about 3% of all available rooftops have solar today. So that's a massive growth opportunity across all these different markets. And it really comes down to, what is the use case? What are the objectives? Are we trying to solve for resiliency? Are we trying to solve for cost reduction? Are we trying to solve for sustainability or enhance value? Which is a big focus of the panel today. Getting into how the power is monetized, how it's optimized. There's two key categories that are commonly associated with distributed energy. That's behind the meter, front of the meter, and the key difference really is who benefits from the energy output and how those cost savings and revenues are optimized depending on the ownership, the contracting structure, the local market incentives and programs, and the types of facilities we're deploying these systems at. In a lot of situations, it could be a blend of both, depending on the market objectives and risk factors. But it's really our job to identify and de-risk and implement the best opportunities across a diverse pool of industrial, commercial real estate, asset types, facilities, and regions. So as you can see on the infographic here, there's front of the meter, which we can start with, and that's what the industry has adopted earlier on. It's a mature market. It's really you're leasing your rooftop, your carport solar, a space for a solar developer to come and install a PV array, and that could take over the entire roof. It could take over a portion, depending on how big the system is being designed. And that developer that sells the power and the associated environmental attributes of that system to the grid. But the power doesn't flow to the host or the on-site load. All the power output goes to the grid. In return, the owner of the real estate asset will receive long-term contracted lease payments as a separated income stream. And we can talk more about how that gets factored into overall valuations. But the key benefits for front of the meter deployments are there's really typically for asset owners no CapEx or OpEx requirements. It's generally easy to implement, especially in states that have supportive policy. And they are structured with long-term fixed term contracted deal structures, could be 15, 20 plus years with typically creditworthy counterparties to support the financing and the project itself. On the other hand, you have behind the meter deployments. Behind the meter really is on the customer or the load side of the utility meter, and where all the on-site energy system that the power output of the facility is there to serve the facility's own load. These systems can be owned, they can be leased to a developer under a long-term PPA, and they're really there to help drive down lower energy costs, create resiliency, and see in some of the markets across the country where you have really constrained grids, where you have very high retail power rates, significant savings on your on-bill utility bills. Typically, facilities with lower cost, more resilient energy should command a market premium. And what works best for larger energy or industrial energy intensive facilities, such as advanced manufacturing facility, a data center, or just a large load building, will typically see behind the meter deployments making more sense because you can use the power output to save a lot of money with the systems on site. But I think we commented earlier, for industrial logistics facilities, which have great flat rooftops for deploying behind the meter, front of the meter solar, those facilities typically don't have a lot of load. So the output of that system could go to serving the grid. And then, we're seeing a lot of interesting hybrid and emerging applications. There could be deployments where you have both behind the meter and front of the meter, where power is going to serve the grid, and you can generate revenues from the grid for providing that resource. And also some of the output is going to serve the on-site load. There are also significant opportunities today with for creating load flexibility and demand response value using on-site generation and storage, which can reduce your reliance on the grid during peak hours. And when you do that, if you can reduce your reliance on the grid during those peak hours of the year, you can save significant amount of money off your utility bills. You can shave your capacity and demand charges, which could be really material, and sometimes it could be more than the actual energy itself. And then we're also seeing batteries being deployed today to help, especially new facilities or for load growth, for customers to get online faster. So batteries can provide that load flexibility that utilities and the grid operators are desiring. They will pay for that load flexibility in some cases. And in return, they might get you online and connected to the grid faster. And then the last item where we're seeing a lot of interest in the market is power boost. Tell me how I can get access to more power, how I can, whether it's through the grid or whether it's through an on-site energy system, and help me understand if I could bring new power to a location or to a facility. Can I attract a different type of tenant profile? Can I, repurpose the facility into something that's perhaps a larger energy intensive use case, such as an advanced manufacturing site? But the question around that all is, what's the incremental power and speed to market worth? And connecting to our grids in the past was not such an issue, but it's becoming a gating factor today, especially for new infrastructure and development. So we can help plan for that load growth, design the right strategy, and quantify the impact of getting online a year or two faster, or augmenting the power access at your facility. Last, I'll just say there's no one-size-fits-all solution. What works in one location may not work in another. So really, we work with asset owners to understand the risks and the greatest value opportunities for deployment.
Super, Brian. Thank you. That was very helpful, and I hope that stimulates additional questions. The infographic here gives you the simple breakdown. We want to make sure we were not talking past each other, but as you highlighted, there are additional layers, and these hybrid systems are possible, both behind the meter, front of the meter solar, but also with batteries, which are increasingly coming. We're going to talk more about a bit. I did see there was a question that's relevant here. It was from Subra about, can you talk a little bit more about the landlord CapEx requirement for both behind the meter and front of meter? And maybe I'll take this one for a moment. In general, front of the meter is mostly going to be zero CapEx for the landlord. There are third-party developers who specialize in building, owning, operating, financing these systems. It's a whole world to be good at selling power to the grid and interconnecting the grid and monetizing that. And so the front of the meter, yellow on the right, that model to a landlord tends to just show up as just rent. And as Brian highlighted, that's a model that's been adopted and is really gaining traction. Um, in the behind the meter, it could be more either or. An owner and occupier could finance this and look at the IRR. This is something that Brian and also Lumen help landlords look at all these options side by side, look at the IRR versus having another transaction structure with a three-letter acronym called a PPA or Power Purchase Agreement, where in the behind the meter scenario, a third party would essentially just sell you power, but it'd be sized for the system would be sized for the configuration where you're avoiding the on-site power. So layers of detail beneath, but hopefully that helps demystify that part. And I think where we've seen the most kind of market activity is around this front of the meter structure. And so there's a bunch of questions that came up. And so you'll see the next set of topics, Koch, if you click ahead. Fortunately, this questions that come up, what is a front of meter solar lease worth at building exit? We have a few examples to share with you all. And I think there were some questions around, how are appraisers able to track comps? How do you handle the solar lease income in a DCF version if the hold period extends beyond this? Because I will say that the commercial life of a solar asset is warranted at 25 years, and there are equipment that typically will last even longer than that. And so you should think of the term of these at kind of a minimum operational life of 25 years. So that raises these long-term valuation questions. So if you click ahead, gotcha, maybe Brian, you could speak to this recent research report that came out by your colleagues.
Yeah, sure. Thanks. So JLL recently conducted a research report here. We worked with a leading solar developer in the U.S., Solar Landscape, and we came up with some really compelling evidence on how you can value solar leases. And our study really concluded that there's some good value uplift. Now, these are not benchmarks. Keep in mind, these are data points, right, in specific locations where on-site solar systems were deployed. But in New Jersey, for example, we saw a project that added about $1.7 million to a $39 million asset base, resulting in almost a 4.5% uplift at the asset valuation. Thanks. That's yep. And then in Baltimore, DC, another case point that we worked on where the on-site solar system added about $2.4 million to a $65 million asset, adding almost a 4% uplift. Now, the valuations, again, these are not benchmarks, right? The uplift in the value creation here could be quite, could be a lot more. It depends on the market. It depends on the cost structure. Depends on the credit. There's a lot of factors that go into it. And obviously local incentives and policy support. But this uplift reflects the present value of the contracted solar income, valued appropriately to the risk profile of the actual project. And JLL's view and our take was that we align with more of the standard DCF methodology of where you would treat the solar lease as a separate income stream than the other lease, and not directly integrate it with the cap rate, because it's a different risk profile. You have different risks with potential recontracting at the end of the term. What's the length of the term? Is the technology obsolete? Does the roof need upgrade? All those factors we look into. There is a significant value component here that you do have a grid interconnect. And at the end of the day, we see more and more signs pointing to the need or the value of having the ability to put power to the grid and for the built environment to serve as a key balancing point, if you will, to the markets where the commercial industrial real estate account for about 40% of total energy usage. Significant. And buildings operate at the grid edge. So there is a significant value associated with being able to put power to the grid, the infrastructure that's in place. But we use a standard DCF model to calculate the value of that lease income. And then that gets then added into the asset valuation at the end, if upon a sale. Peter or David, I don't
Super.
know if you want to add anything to that.
Yeah, I would like to chime in here. So you're talking about building valuations, and I'm going to be speaking from the perspective of an appraiser and how they view this. So there's a couple of different situations here. How do you generate income off of a building? And it's usually through rental income. So has been discussed so far from Brian and Peter is that there's behind the meter and then there's the front of the meter scenario. So a building owner may take that option and install the solar panels themselves. So what does an appraiser need to consider in that scenario? This would be the behind the meter scenario. Um, What you would have to consider, first of all, is the capital outlay. Is your building roof structure capable of holding these rooftop units? If not, then you have to spend a little bit of money to reinforce the roof framing so that it can support the weight of the solar systems. The other capital that you got to consider is the panels themselves, or if you're talking battery, the component that holds the batteries. But on the capital cost outlay for the solar panels themselves and to install them, then you have to consider the operating expense to maintain the equipment over its useful life. You also have to consider the useful life of the equipment. Like Brian and Peter were saying, they're 20, 25 years useful life, and maybe even beyond that because of the maintenance that you provided over the years that you had it on top of the roof. But as a building owner and you own the solar panels, you do achieve or you can achieve energy savings not only from the utilities, reduced utilities, but you got tax incentives such as the federal tax credits. You may have state level community solar panel programs. You may have local rebates, renewable energy credits, and then the net metering programs, which improve the solar economics. Regarding net metering credits and the sale of excess electricity. So the building itself can take advantage of the energy attained through the solar panels. That reduces the actual building owner's expense of utilities. But then there may be excess capacity that you can sell off to the grid, the power grid, that is. So these are some things that an appraiser would look at from a building owner perspective, the BTM.
Yeah, I think it's kind of interesting though, David, because if you think about the differentiating behind the meter versus front of the meter, right? Front of the meter pure front of the meter deployments, all that again, the output of that energy system is going to the grid in return for a long-term lease, right? That long-term lease we equated to like telecom leases, right? Where appraisers have valued rooftop telecom leases for 40 plus years. This is quite standard mature stuff, right? These are fixed term contracted rents from credit-worthy counterparties. When you think about behind the meter deployments, why are behind the meter deployments growing in popularity? Like why is there a lot more emphasis and interest in understanding, wait a second, I'm using my rooftop or adjacent land for ground mount, for energy storage or for solar. Why do I want to actually consume that energy on site as opposed to putting that power to the grid? Because our grids are becoming so constrained, because energy prices are becoming so volatile, the value from a real estate standpoint of having lower cost, more resilient energy supply for your tenants could be quite significant, especially in markets where there's a lot of supply. And so, but those are typically structured not like a long-term lease, where for front of the meter, those are typically shared savings, right? There's a significant savings in energy costs, or there's revenue generation from putting, to your point, David, that power to the grid. How do we, tenant landlords, how do we work on structuring the commercial framework where there's shared savings? And it could be significant.
Right, right. Well, I'm just demonstrating the differences between behind the meter if the building owner opted for that route, because they can do a cost analysis to see how much capital outlay there is, what are the operating expenses, and what are the utility savings versus what is, you can sell off to the grid. That would be income.
Hmm. Hmm.
All those can be analyzed and put into a cash flow analysis projection over your holding period, and that can be discounted back to a present value. That would then be added to your regular property value.
If you own the
So
system, if the system is capitalized, if it's commercially owned by the building owner itself, right?
that is correct,
Yeah,
yes.
it wouldn't be treated like that if it was structured as a long-term lease or a PPA, as we were
So
saying
that's where I
before.
wanted to lead into next is
Mhm.
the third party owned solar panels like service provider. So this is front of meter. So again, prior to the provider coming in, the solar provider coming in, we have to determine the load capacity on the roof to see if they can maintain the solar panels. I mean, these solar panels aren't that heavy, but we still have to look at the roof structure. Is it capable of holding that load factor? But then, like you said, the third party provider comes in, installs a solar system, and pays for all the outlay costs. Um, and then there's a lease that's written to the building owner between the building owner and the solar provider. And that could be just pure rental income for leasing out the rooftop space. It could be a hybrid, like you had mentioned earlier, where some of that power is used to offset some of the utilities factors in the building itself. Um, the building owners say, hey, I want to participate in some of that revenue stream that goes back to the power grid. So there's just variations to that lease that can be designed and has to be analyzed by a real estate appraiser. Solar panels can reduce electrical expenses and provide protection against future utility rate increases, and that will improve the property's owner operating performance and its investment appeal. Um, Buildings with solar installations are increasingly attractive to tenants and investors seeking energy efficient and environmental sustainable properties. In this perspective, in this light, tenants like to lease from building owners who are conscious of the environment and doing everything they can to be green, to be environmental friendly. And if they see rooftop panels up there, um, they know that the building owner is trying to make an attempt to be more environmental friendly. Although the building owner may benefit from those solar panels, the tenant still it's a optics scenario where the tenant will agree to pay rent to lease the space because they know the building owner is taking care of the environment. In fact, some tenants may pay more rent because of the solar panels. So these are things that some other additional things that the appraiser would look at with respect to um, the front of the model scenario. As far as,
Right. Yeah. Oh, go ahead, David.
I was just going to really quick on the valuation of it. Um, JLL had put out a great article on one methodology of how to value the lease through the discounted cash flow analysis. They suggest that using that cash flow projection outside of the property valuation. But there's also a very good argument for including those leases alongside the other leases of the building. It's no different. So if you're leasing space within the building versus leasing space on top of the building, there's still leases that can be valued within that cash flow projection. And what the appraiser will do is analyze the tenants and the credit worthiness of all the tenants, including the rooftop tenants and the solar panel provider. They'll evaluate their credit worthiness and apply certain discount factors or risk ratings to those tenants, and then come up with a blended discount rate. And you can incorporated in with the property valuation. And the reason why that's easier to do is because when you look at sale comparables that have solar panels, it's all blended in together with the property valuation. So when you look at the sale and it says it sold at a 5.5% cap rate, it's a blend of the building tenant occupancy plus the solar panel lease, rooftop leases. And that's easier to extract from the market than having a separate extraction for cap rates, discount rates for just the solar panel income stream.
Yeah, this is it's a great discussion, and I think part of the kind of many of the juicy topics we want to get into today is that within the realm of front of the meter, where there's just a zero capex for the landlord, take this building here on the left, as Brian highlighted, one could consider behind the meter, though there's the question of does that building consume enough electricity, the sort of ratio of the using the total roof versus the on-site energy. And it could consume a lot, in which case it'd be very advantageous to do behind the meter. But in some cases, it consume a little relative to the roof space. And so, JLL report highlighted that. And then you get into this valuation question. And I think JLL has done the whole community a great service by highlighting the perhaps the DCF methodology, which you're speaking to, but there is the cap rate methodology. And this just takes a specific example that went through Lumen's marketplace, got 9 different bids. There are wide ranges of bids for these solar leases. It's still quite inefficient market. But the winning bid in this case was $429,000 a year, contracted for 20 years at a 2.5% annual escalator. And what you see on the left and right is just the simple math that David is speaking to. And I think it's a really interesting conversation because on the one hand, you could say, and David, please correct me, but I think the conventional wisdom has been, well, this solar lease is only 20 years, whereas the way we underwrite renting property space is an indefinite period when we do the cap rate methodology. But if we look at solar separately, we're only looking at the contracted term. And I think the thing that I think is going to emerge is something Brian hinted at, is that interconnection to the grid is a very valuable asset, which extends way longer than 20 years. And so I think we have to ask ourselves the question, do we believe that in year 21, it will no longer make sense to have solar or anything else at the building? Because I think where the world's going to go is that people will say, of course, we should keep doing this at this location. And then you quickly get back to the same underwriting methodology that is the cap rate methodology. So that's my hot take, and I'd love to hear what you have to say, on this, David or Brian.
Yeah, so on a direct cap rate, it all depends on the length of the lease. So if you got like, let's say 5 years left on that lease,
Mm-hmm.
maybe a direct cap rate may not be the right analysis. However, like any other building, you anticipate releasing it to another tenant and then continue. Same with the solar panels. You had said that the longevity, the lifespan of these 25 years, in fact, after that 25-year period, if you've had a history, a strong revenue history here of income, and the benefit outweighs the cost of putting installing them or maintaining them, you want to continue that. So even after 21 years, you're going to either repair the units, the solar panels, or you're going to install a newer solar panels and then continue another income flow for the next 25 years. So that being the case, a direct cap rate is applicable even in the reversion calculation. A
Yeah,
DCF,
I'll
although
add that we see, the 20-year term was used in the JLL report, and it's what you see on the slide here. But at Lumen, we see hundreds of transactions, and we're seeing the providers, the solar developers, ask for 25 years with 2 5-year extensions, really getting to a 35-year term out of the gate. So just letting the whole community know that there are commercial providers who essentially will commit to a 35-year term today. And I think that essentially would close the gap even further here between these two methodologies, both of which are better than forgetting you have a solar lease at all and this income at the sale of property, which unfortunately has happened. Yeah. So sorry,
so
David, you were going to say something.
Yeah, well, theoretically, whether you use a direct cap or DCF analysis, appraisal theory, valuation theory, they both should come out to the same answer.
Mm.
So there shouldn't be this variance. And if there is a variance, then you got to go look at the mechanics of how you derived your cap rate, how you derived your discount rate, and what are the risk factors you're applying to it. But whether you use a direct cap or a DCF, either way should come out to the similar answer for the value of the panels. And also if you're just appraising real estate for that matter. So I
Well,
just
this is
wanted to
a
point that
good,
out.
it's a good lead into some of the questions. I know we've got just about 15 more minutes here, and I want to make sure we get to the questions that were raised. One of them, I'll just read it out from Philip Carmody, was, and this is probably for you, David, or Brian. How are appraisers able to track comps for cap and discount rates for solar income?
Yeah, I kind of referred to a little earlier. A cap rate and discount rate are derived from a sale of a property. So when you sell something, you look at the potential income that you can earn going forward in the future, and then that income is divided by the sale price. That's your cap rate. Same with the discounted cash flow analysis. You can revert back or reverse engineer what that discount rate is by looking at the buyer's projection of the cash flows, what the buyer anticipates at the reversion at the end of the holding period, selling the property off, and that income stream, using the sale price, you can derive an implied discount rate. Um, with solar panels, you typically don't see separate sale transactions of solar panels being sold to, on top of a building, because it's really the building owner that owns that rooftop. So when you see a sale, it's usually the building owner selling it to another building owner, and along with it is the solar panels. So that's why I was saying it's hard to pull out just the solar income. I mean, you could do it. You could pull out the solar income and then you can pull out the building income. But then how do you allocate it? Well, that cap rate that we came up with, how do you allocate it between the two different income streams? That's the tricky part.
Right.
Whereas when you combine them, you get one cap rate, and then the appraiser can analyze that cap rate based on the income streams, what percentage of income the solar has versus the rest of the property. So that's why the overall cap rate from the property sales is the best method.
Great. And you spoke about something earlier, David, that I want to just elaborate on for the whole community here, is that if the case that the solar battery income became a meaningful fraction of the total rent for the property, then you might even consider sort of adjusting the overall cap rate underlying the sale of the property. Is that right? Could you elaborate on that point?
Yes, that's a great point. So traditional, if you got a credit-worthy solar provider that installed the units and they got a great credit worthiness and they got a long-term lease and it covers, let's say, 20 or 30% of the total income for that building, then that's low risk. When you have a long-term lease like that with a credit-worthy tenant, that's low risk. So that would then lower your discount rate, which also would then enhance or increase the value of the property.
Helpful. Super. There's Brian, I'll turn it to you. There's another question here. Is JLL, is from Grant Klein, says, is JLL or others in the industrial real estate brokerage space currently including the incremental value of energy assets like solar storage and interconnection, et cetera, in the valuation? How widespread is this knowledge or willingness to include solar in the cap rate? So what's
Yeah,
your
absolutely. I
experience?
mean, it's an important, again, driver evaluation, right? Just like the rental income is. And so cap rate versus DCF methodology, right? They're both, they both have merit. And to your point, David, how do you consolidate them at the end of the day to determine the value of the building, right, relative to the lease income, overall NOI, right? But brokers typically, this is the front of the meter model, really has started to really pick up speed and gain traction over the last 5 to 10 years. And we still need a body of evidence to show how to properly value front of the meter leased assets, and what that price is at a sale, at a sale price, or at a disposition. That's still being built out, right? There's still, there's benchmarks. We promote the DCF model, which is well understood. We treat again, you have infrastructure that serves a significant purpose, reduces costs, provides flexibility back to our grids, promotes sustainability. You have that interconnection. These are, we believe, are assets that will continue to produce and be utilized. But I think brokers are going to require standardized lease disclosures, right? So when you think about those disclosures, we need clean data to be able to assess, lease terms, annual rents that you're getting, escalations, the developer and the off-taker creditworthiness, right? What's the interconnection status like? What's the life of the hardware? All these factors, and I think it's in the industry's best interest to try to streamline and standardize the approach, recognizing that there's probably not a right or wrong way to do it. It's just that we know that it could be significant incremental value, and how do we account for it during a sale process is important, because brokers at JLL all want to see transactions go smooth, and we're looking for speed, efficiency, and transparency, most importantly. So hope that answers the question. But
yeah, I'd like to add to that too, Brian. So you bring up a good point. This is relatively new to the institutional world. And as it gains traction, this is going to gain more and more value and added value to the property. I think back to the self-storage industry back in the early 90s. People thought they were just mom and pop type facilities. But then it became institutionalized, where big developers came in and created these properties, and they were traded in the institutional world, and it became more and more well known. So cap rates from the early 90s, if you looked solely at the aspect of mom and pop type facilities versus institutional grade quality investments, those cap rates came down significantly because of the gain in popularity in the institutional world. So this will also gain traction, and you'll see that these solar and battery type leases that generate income for the prop, you're going to see that that's going to become less and less risk, and then that's going to drive down your cap rates and discount rates, which increases values.
yeah.
Yeah, I think something that was also raised, here, but was alluded to, I'll elaborate on, was, what is the credit of the, of the developer? So once these projects are developed, there's a development period where you get all your final permits. Then there's construction. You might hear these dates: NTP, notice to proceed. That's the start of construction. COD is commercial operations date. Then it's interconnected. Everything's working and operational. Then the question is, well, hey, what happens if this party who owns this asset goes out of business in, let's say, year 7 or 12 or 19? Something I want to make sure the community knows is that there's a very active market to trade, to sort of secondary sales effectively. So once you have an operating asset, just like a real estate asset, in the world of energy, there are firms that are backed by many of the firms actually that are familiar here, whether it be PGIM or Apollo or other, private equity firms, that will essentially trade in these assets. So it's a long way of saying that if a developer, let's say, goes bankrupt in year 17, then there are other folks who would want to come in and just pick up an operational and functioning and sort of profitable asset. So that's something it's a bit opaque. It's in the world of kind of energy specialty project finance, but there's a very real transaction world and actually firms that focus on that exclusively.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you see that in retail. Like, for example, over the last, because of COVID, we saw a lot of retailers go out of business.
Yeah.
Other tenants came along and leased up that space. So again, it'd be the same thing with the solar panels. Somebody else, like you said, Peter, will come in and take over.
That's right. Well, super. I know I'm looking over the questions. There was any other questions in the audience? Now is a good time. We got just a couple more minutes. Let's see. I think we've covered, I'm looking through them. I think we've covered these. Let's see. Maybe, Katya, you could just click ahead. We'll do sort of lightning round to finish up. I'll just highlight there is this report that's for free for everyone that we've put out into the world. It's called Lumen Solar Index. It shows the range of pricing in dollars per square foot for solar leases across 4 key states: New Jersey, Maryland, Massachusetts, Illinois. We see thousands of bids, many, I think over 2,000 today, and hundreds of transactions. So we're just providing this market data as a point to help the industry get to the place where I think David and Brian spoke to, of some consensus of how these are both where the pricing lands, but also how to ultimately transact in the property. So maybe, Katya, if you could click ahead to the battery piece. I want to maybe, and I think we covered these points. So Brian, I know, in our discussions, we were talking about batteries coming up, and maybe you could just share what you're seeing in the market today. And David, I'll turn it over to you again for last word there.
Sure. I mean, there's tremendous interest in deploying batteries behind the meter or front of the meter on site at our commercial industrial real estate client sites. And for the reason, it not only can provide resiliency, improved uptime and cost reduction for our clients when they're buying and sourcing energy, but at the same time, these batteries can serve our grids in a meaningful way. They can provide significant, as I mentioned before, load flexibility back to the grid. And the distributed, that's what distributed energy is all about. It's about optimizing and monetizing energy resources in the most effective way. And what I love about batteries is that you can slice that battery up into different revenue stacks, right? Some of the revenues for those batteries can go to serve the grid. And as the owner of that battery, you can generate some significant revenue for demand response to capacity. The grids will pay you to call on that battery when there's peak demand. So those services you provide to the grid could be highly lucrative. And then on the other end of the spectrum, when we slice that battery and look at the value stack, there's significant cost savings. You can use those batteries, as I mentioned earlier, to reduce your load during peak hours of the year. And, when you get your utility bill, a significant component of your utility bill is transmission and distribution costs, demand charges. And so batteries can really go a long way to reducing your peak demand during those hours, shaving your load, shaving your peak demand, and therefore you can save a significant amount of money on your utility bills. And you can optimize energy consumption from the grid, called time of use, right? When it's advantageous to. So you'll discharge the battery when the grid prices are high. You'll charge the battery when it's low. And there are very savvy, smart energy management systems today that get integrated with the battery and solar systems. Batteries can optimize the solar, of course, like that's a hybrid, battery and solar, much more impactful for behind the meter energy cost savings and revenue generation. And yeah, I think we talk about front of the meter solar, right? Community solar. I think the market's going to be coming. You're going to see a lot more front of the meter battery deployments, community battery deployments, right? Where the grids, the utility operators are all going to be paying significant value for the rights to call on these batteries and for that load flexibility that the batteries can provide, especially for large industrial, large load applications like a data center. Data centers could deploy batteries behind a meter and save a significant amount of money on their energy spend. Um,
Yeah, it's super interesting. I mean, just for everyone's reference on how utilities operate, I mean, they have to deploy capacity to meet the very last 5 minutes of demand. So the peak day in the middle of the summer, everyone has air conditioning on, it's really hot, and everyone's watching the World Cup, let's say. They have to spend money to go hit
mhm.
that last moment. And so what's starting to change in the industry is people saying we cannot go deploy more infrastructure. We can't build new power lines. It'll take too long. Or we can, but it's going to be over 5 or 10 years. And so it's creating a new, for the first time, really in the last 6 or 12 months, a new desire to essentially pay for batteries to be deployed all over. And so it is an emerging trend we're seeing. And so David, we'll be coming back to you for guidance on how to be think about how to think about batteries in terms of building valuations as well. So, any last word, David, you want to share? And everyone.
Yeah, just one last word. I know we're running short here, but just really quick. As far as like solar, everybody needs to start thinking it does enhance value of the property, whether it's behind the meter or in front of the meter. There's value there. And, when you speak to people who are going to be valuing the real estate or even valuing the meters or the solar panels, just recognize there's value there that contributes to the property and, seek out the experts like JLL to value the systems for you. So that's just really what I wanted to see. And then bringing awareness. Now that you've heard this seminar or webinar, make other people aware of it too. I'm part of the National Counselors of Real Estate Investment Fiduciaries and the Valuation Committee. So I'm going to be mentioning it to them that, let's talk about solar panels and how does this add value to commercial real estate. So by bringing awareness across the community, across the industry, that's also going to enhance the continuance of solar and battery as well.
Super. Well, that's a great place to wrap. Thank you, David, and thank you, Brian, for joining, and for everyone who's dialing in. Thank you for contributing your time. If you have questions, you can reach out to any of us, Brian, David, myself, Peter. And this webinar will be available for free. We'll send that out shortly. So have a great rest of your day.
Thanks all.
Thank you.